We're on a series now, part 4 of the game of life. And we're just kind of using that illustration of a game and a sport and that kind of thing as an illustration, just like Jesus would, to teach about bigger things, deeper things. And we talked about it now for a few weeks, and we start off with, okay, well, in the game of life, we should understand that there's a goal. Remember what we said the goal was? How we need to frame that, how we need to think about that?
He reads towards God.
Right. To be rich towards God. And that was pulling out something that Jesus said in one of his parables from Luke chapter 12. To be rich towards God. And that's a kind of an interesting turn of a phrase. We don't really, see that kind of thing put together like that. To be rich, we all understand that. But towards God really points us in a different direction. Because, that means that we have something of value and abundance in God's eyes. And that's not material things. It's the idea that when we're rich towards God, we have things like in our life that are like humility and compassion and kindness and even courage and these kind of things, that we have the right kind of things in our life in abundance because we're rich in God's eyes. We're rich towards God. And so that's the goal. But we also need to know how to get to the goal. And what do we build on? What's our foundation for that? Do you remember? Right. The trust in the Lord. The trust in the Lord. And as you carry that out, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And so that's the game plan, that's the strategy, that's how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to be faithful to God. This is how we're going to reach our goal, to trust in the Lord daily. And so we have a goal, we have a game plan, but we also need to know how the rich play the game. What's the right attitude to have as we're going about this game of life? How the rich, those that are rich towards God, how do the rich play the game? They play with what kind of attitude? You remember? Gratitude, right. That's how you know you're doing it right. That's how you know that you're in the right frame of mind, that you have a thankful attitude. We looked at some verses last week that kind of reinforced that. That we have that idea of gratitude towards God. Because gratitude is a very special thing. It helps us experience life as a gift. Gratitude helps us experience life as a gift. It's not all about us, but it helps us experience life as a gift. And that's what gratitude does for us. That's why it's so special. That's why we need to make sure that we have a thankful heart. So we got a goal, we have a game plan, and we know how to play the game, the right attitude. But in any kind of game or sport, just because you know the goal and have a game plan and know how to play, that doesn't mean everything goes smoothly. That doesn't mean there aren't pitfalls. That doesn't mean there aren't problems. That doesn't mean everything is just hunky-dory. Just because you know these things and got all this laid out, that doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect from then on out. Because you can make mistakes. There's going to be problems. In baseball, you make a mistake, you're striking out. Now you had all these things, you knew all these things, but you can still strike out in baseball. You can know all these things in football, and you can still fumble the ball. Right? You can still make mistakes in these games, even though you have this all nailed down. Think about golf. What's a mistake in golf? What would that be? What did you say?
Playing it.
Play.
Hard.
Well, let's look beyond that. What else? When you actually are playing the game. What's that?
Sand trap.
A sand trap. Okay, that's a good example. Yeah. A hazard, a sand trap. What do they call it with the water? A water hazard. Yeah, a water hazard. And so you got that in golf. In tennis, what's a foul in tennis? What's a mistake in tennis?
Missed the ball.
Okay, you missed the ball. Yeah.
Out of bounds.
Yeah, you hit it out of bounds. With the white chalk and all.
Football.
What's that?
Got football from him.
And footfalls. Yeah.
Football.
That's right. So you can see, even though you have all this stuff nailed down, there still can be mistakes along the way. And this is what we're going to talk about today in the game of life, is that even though you can be right on with all these, there's still ways for you to have problems. And so that's our focus today. Problems in the game. Because there's always going to be a hazard. There's always going to be a mistake that can be made. There's always going to be something that you're going to have to deal with where things don't go so smoothly. Even though you may be really good on these other parts, you're still going to have to deal with a problem in the game. And we're going to look at one specific one today that's going to be very important for us to remember. Problems in the game. Problems in the game. Say it with me. Problems in the game. One more time. Problems in the game. So if somebody asks you later on what we talked about this morning, or this comes up, you say, we talked about problems in the game. And they're like, what in the world are you talking about? I thought you went at church. And you said, well, let me explain it to you. And then you can kind of go on from there. So that's our focus. Problems in the game. So we want to look to that answer and how to solve that. We want to go to the New Testament. I want you to turn with me to the book of Philippians. In the New Testament, the book of Philippians, or the letter of the Philippians. So have your New Testament, or pull it up on your phone or tablet, or grab one in the front of the pew. It's a small book in the New Testament. The book of Philippians. The book of Philippians. Now, who is this letter written to? Christians, the church. Church where? Right, Philippi. It's a city. It's not the Philippines. It's not the Filipinos. You see this it's just kind of a strange, because we don't see that word too often. Philippians. The church at Philippi. Anybody know where Philippi is? In the world? Where that would be? It's kind of like what we would call northern Greece, or at that point in time, Macedonia. So it's a city there. It's actually the first European place where Paul has mission work successful. And so it's actually crossing over into what we call continental Europe. And so this is actually one of the first successful places that Paul had mission work. And so we go to this letter. This is a prison letter. Paul is writing this letter from prison. And so he's writing this to the Philippians, the church at Philippi, from prison. And I got to tell you, he really loves these people. If you read the book to Philippians, you can tell Paul really loves these people. And they really love Paul. I mean, he says some really great things about them. He compliments them. He talks about how much they love him in return. This is just a very heartfelt letter. You can tell Paul loves these people, and that they love him back. And so Paul, he's writing this letter to them, and he's writing to them, and he wants to give them something, this church at Philippi, something that is irreplaceable, that is invaluable. He wants to give them something that is priceless. Okay? So this church at Philippi, he wants to give them something that's priceless. He wants to help them be rich towards God. Okay? So look at Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4. So flip a couple pages. Philippians chapter 4. And in chapter 4, go down to verse 9. Philippians 4, verse 9. And this is what he says. He says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. He says, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Now, if the Philippian church had learned from Paul, received from Paul, heard from Paul, and seen in Paul, what does that tell you about his relationship with them? What does that tell you about his relationship with them? If he can say, guys, what you've learned, what you've received, what you've heard, and what you've seen, it had to be a very close relationship. Yeah. He's not a preacher on TV. He's not a preacher on a hologram, right? He's like, guys, you know me. And he points to what they've learned, they've received, they've heard, and they've seen. And he says, these things, put it into practice. What you've learned, what you've received, what you've heard, what you've seen. See how close that relationship is? See how much he was a part of their congregation? See how well they knew him, that he could point to these things, and they would all go, yeah, that's exactly. We have learned from you, we have received from you, we have heard from you, and we've seen it in you. See, that's the kind of relationship he has with them. Because he wants them to be rich towards God, just like he's rich towards God. He wants them to be successful in this. And what does he offer? An example. He offers himself. He offers himself. He wants them to be rich towards God, just like he's rich towards God. He's made an investment in them. He spent time with them. He's been close to them. And so this is what he points to. Now, this is something we have to keep in mind because being rich toward God is a group project. Being rich towards God is a group project. It's not something that you can do on your own. You cannot isolate yourself and be rich towards God. Everybody who's rich towards God wants to help others to be rich towards God. Being rich towards God is a group project. Now think back for a second. When we talked about this parable, you don't have to turn there, that Jesus told in Luke chapter 12. Now he told a parable in Luke chapter 12 about this rich man, right? And this rich man was self-centered, and this rich man eventually died and faced judgment. Okay, that's Luke chapter 12. And then Jesus told a parable in Luke chapter 16 about a rich man and another man named Lazarus. You may remember this one. Okay, he's another rich man. He's self-centered. He eventually dies and faces judgment. Okay, Luke chapter 12, Luke chapter 16. What these two fellas have in common is not just the fact that they're rich and self-centered, it's that they're alone. They're always pictured as being alone. They're always pictured as being alone. When it looks at the rich man talking to Lazarus after death, and Jesus gives you a little monologue there with that, he is alone. The rich man who got the abundance in crop, it's all for me, it's all for me, it's all for me, and I will say, how you phrase it, and I will do, because he's always alone in the context. And the rich man with Lazarus is always pictured as being alone. That's significant. Because those that aren't rich towards God are very often alone. That's the problem in the game that they can run into, and you and I can run into. As we go through life and we're content with our own spiritual feelings and spiritual growth and spiritual things, we're content to read and to worship, and we can isolate ourselves so easily. And we forget that being rich towards God is a group project. Paul didn't isolate himself. Look what he says. He's learned, he's received, he's heard, he's seen. Because he knows what you and I should know, is that you can't be rich towards God alone. It's a group project. And if you're rich towards God, you want to help others be rich too. You want to help others be rich too. Now, there's a few ways you can do that. You can kind of integrate yourself into people's lives. And these are three that I've found very helpful. One is be a listener. You want to integrate yourself into someone's life and help them and bless them. You be a good listener. People, when people know you're listening to them, it's important because they're not used to it. Their own family tunes them out, right? They got whole people, groups of people in their family that don't listen to them. They've got people at work who won't listen to them. They've got people across the street that won't listen to them. They're used not to being listened to. They're used to being dismissed. That's the norm for them. But you want to be a blessing to someone, and you want to help them be rich towards God, be a listener. Listen to what they have to say. Listen to them, just unload some stuff. Just listen. Just be there to listen to them. Be encouraging. When you find something positive in their life from listening that you can reinforce and encourage, well, do that. Maybe they got some aspirations about something, and maybe everybody in their family and their circle of friends or work has just shot them down. But it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. Encourage them. People are so used to being criticized. They're so used to that. They're so used to negativity. But when you're listening to them, they're not used to that. And when you actually say something positive and encouraging to them, you've got a friend. Because they're not used to that. They recognize how special that is. They can go all week long and not hear one encouragement. And then all of a sudden you have something good to say. So be a listener. Be encouraging. Be available. Now, I know you're busy. Everybody's busy. I know people, and you could maybe testify to this and amen this, that I know people that after they retire, they're busier than when they worked full time. That just happens, and it may really surprise you that that worked out that way, because you thought after I retired, I'd have all of this time to just kind of pick and choose what I want to do, and then you end up retired, you go, wow, I'm busier than when I had a full-time job. So I get it. You're busy, I'm busy, everybody's busy. Not only that, we can be distracted so much. We've got more to be distracted to in this day and age than ever before in the history of the world. There is so much available. And we can just get caught up in our time we look, it's 9 o'clock at night, next thing we know it's midnight. It's 6 o'clock in the afternoon, next thing we know it's 9 o'clock. Where did that time go? Ask the younger generation. That's what they're struggling with. More than probably any other. Is they're getting so distracted by stuff, it just eats up their time. And so they have to fight against that, and we need to be aware of that too. Because it can happen to us just as easy. But if you make yourself available, if you make space in your life for that person, then that's something that they don't get too much of because they're busy too a lot of times. But you make yourself available. You have a positive, good thing to say. You are listening to them. Because the rich try to help others be rich too. This is what Paul was doing. Being rich toward God is a group project. My mom was a parapro in schools. Anybody know what that is when I say parapro? Does anybody know that job position? Yeah. It's kind of like a teacher, but it's more like an assistant to a teacher kind of deal. Usually not as much schooling is involved and that kind of stuff. But anyway, she was a parapro for a number of years. And there was this one woman she worked with that nobody could stand. And this woman wasn't just like outrageous or mean or anything like that. She was just so antisocial. And her family was very antisocial. And she was just, she wasn't a bad person as far as her, what she was doing. She was just so antisocial. Nobody, would really get that close to her. Because they just kind of knew that she was awkward and she wasn't going to be sociable, and so they just wouldn't be sociable with her. But my mom started inviting her over for coffee every evening. And it was happening like 3 or 4 times a week. That after, they'd be serving at school as parapros together. In the evening, she'd come over. My mom would listen to her. Nobody was listening to her. My mom would encourage her where she could. Nobody had that for her. My mom made time for her. And it changed this woman's life over years. This woman who was so antisocial, so distant, so awkward in her own skin kind of person, and just had no friends, nobody to talk to. And her family was really, antisocial too. This woman changed so much that they didn't even recognize her at my mom's funeral. They didn't even recognize her. You're her? How did she change? Well, my mom was sowing seeds the whole way, pointed her to Jesus. My mom was giving her time. Nobody gives her time. My mom was encouraging her. Nobody encouraged her. My mom was listening to her. And nobody was listening to her. That's the kind of impact we can have. I'm not saying it's easy yet, but I'm saying, look, we're fighting for a bigger kingdom here. We're working on bigger stuff here. We've got a bigger mission than just us. We've got to think bigger. And if you've got somebody that you can be a listener to, be encouraging to, be available to, then you can be rich towards God, and you can help them be rich towards God too. I tell you, my time in ministry, I couldn't tell you how many sermons I've preached. I couldn't tell you how many Bible studies I've led. I couldn't tell you how many seminars I've done. I couldn't tell you how many ministry events I've been to. I couldn't tell you any of those things. But I'll never forget the time I invested with a friend at church. He was 40 years old, and he had a stroke. And he just kind of changed his life and had been accepted into law school. He was going to go to law school at 40. He was brilliant. And he decided, this is what I'm going to do. He was accepted into law school. But before he could start, at 40 years old, he had a stroke. A massive stroke. He was sitting up at the theater watching a movie. Alps Theater. Just watching a movie. Nothing else going on. And then has a massive stroke, and they have to carry him out. And in the week after that, they're sitting there telling his wife, he's going to be a vegetable, he's not going to have any abilities, you need to be thinking about, how you're going to go on with this and the decisions you have to make and all this kind of stuff, as hard as they are. And that's the kind of prognosis he was given by doctors. But that's not the end of the story. He started to recover slowly. It took months. And his wife left him. Because she didn't sign on to be the wife of a vegetable. No matter how much he's recovered. And it's going on months and months and months. And he loses his home. And months and years. And I won't remember all these sermons or talks or seminars or classes and all that kind of stuff. I won't remember anything, but I'll remember the day I was with him when he tied his shoe for the first time. After all of that, we went out and celebrated. You have to be available. Give somebody something positive in their life. Give encouragement. Be a listener. He's just over 50 years old now. He regularly attends church. He can read to some degree now. He can drive to some degree now. He has an apartment on his own now. He walks with a limp. Half of his body is pretty much paralyzed for most of the time. But he lives independently. And I've seen that happen. And that was one of the greatest blessings in ministry that I can ever recount. But I only got to see it because I was there. Because I made time for him. Because I listened. Because I encouraged him. Look at our Savior. Didn't he just pour himself out for his friends? He wasn't some monk on a hill or some kind of sage or wise man, distant and stuff where people would just bring questions to him. He was at people's weddings. He was at people's feasts. He was at the holy festivals. He was in the streets. He was talking to people at the temple. We see him just over and over again, just pouring himself into their lives, wherever they're at. Because being rich towards God is a group project. You help others. As the music plays, that's what I want to put on your heart today. Because we can have all these other things right, but we better check on that problem too. Of isolating ourselves, of being caught up in ourselves, of just being only about ourselves. We're missing out on being rich towards God.